Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. This is a show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. Tonight, I'll be shortly joined by my very special guest and good friend, Jerry Dalton. Jerry was recently inducted in the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame, and we'll get to talk with him about that. We'll talk about with him about his new book called The Way of Bourbon, and it'll be a wonderful conversation. Jerry has some great stories, wonderful sense of humor, so I know you'll enjoy it. But before we get into that, we want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who produce content for the whiskey enthusiast. Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. They talk with distillers from across the country and around the world about anything and everything in terms of distillation. Alan also has a show called One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, where he will share his knowledge with anybody that's willing to ask. So ask, send him some questions. He'll come up with some great answers and he'll post those online for all of us to learn. Alan also has a show called If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. And this show will touch on the spiritual, the paranormal. It's a little adjacent to anything whiskey, but it is a lot of fun, and I know you'll enjoy that too. My Whiskey Den with Pat and Mike and Mitch every Monday night live, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time. My Whiskey Den is where craft whiskey is king. Be sure to join those guys. It's a lot of fun. They do great tastings, have wonderful guests, and it's fun to hang out in the chat. David Levine is also a part of Bar Cart Co-op now. Whiskey in My Wedding Ring. He has a wonderful podcast. He is a great writer. We've got a show that he and I are talking about coming up soon. You will not want to miss that. It will be a hoot and a half. So, what about us? Bourbon Turntable. If you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We would appreciate it. That way you will not miss any shows. You can also listen on your favorite podcast platform as long as it's Apple, Spotify, or Google. So, without any more yakking from me, I want to bring on Jerry Dalton. Buy his book. Follow him on Facebook. You'll really enjoy it. Really clever guy, and a legend in the bourbon industry. So, welcome, Jerry Dalton. Well, I'm joined here by Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer Jerry Dalton. Jerry was instrumental in so many ways during his career in the whiskey industry. He was a bridge builder in many facets of the word and the concept of building bridges, and we'll talk a little bit about that. He talks about that some in his book as well. Jerry is known as the only non-Beam family member to be Master Distiller at Jim Beam Distillery, and quite frankly, he's probably going to be the only one ever. Like I said, he was inducted in the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame last year. He has recently had a book published called The Way of Bourbon, and we'll talk a lot about that in the next few minutes as well. I am honored to have Jerry on the show again, and I'm honored to call Jerry my friend. Jerry, welcome back to Bourbon Turntable.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. The honor's all mine. I truly appreciate being on your show, and I truly appreciate I think of them as our table talks. When you come to see me and we taste a little whiskey and compare notes, and
Yes.
It's very valuable to me.
It is a lot of fun, and I try to bring some things that you might not have had before, and I'm always interested in your thoughts and your comments, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those comments in just a little while. But right now, the house bourbon at the Jerry Dalton residence is Jim Beam Black, and I think we're both drinking some Jim Beam Black tonight. And so, Jerry, welcome to the show, and cheers to you, sir.
Thank you, Kevin, and cheers right back at you.
So, as I mentioned, and as I would hope anybody that hadn't been living under a rock knows, you were finally inducted into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame last spring or last fall, and that was something like that was long overdue. But what was it like to get the word that you had been nominated and then inducted into the hall?
Well, it was obviously exciting to me. It was something I hadn't really given any thought to at all. And Steve Akeley and you, as far as I'm concerned, were instrumental in doing a little whiskey rabble rousing and getting me back in the show, so to speak. And Fred Noe, bless his heart, he was a good friend and a good neighbor, and he actually nominated me for consideration. The whole process from beginning to end was almost surreal because I hadn't given it any thought. I spent a lot of time actually watching things unfold and being surprised and amazed and totally pleased. So thank you for all your help in that matter.
I don't know that I had much to do with that, other than being an advocate for you and a supporter for you. Here's a photo of you there at the ceremony, accepting your induction into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. So it was fun and it was a great honor, and I'm forever grateful for the opportunity to sit there at your table with you and your family. And so it was that was pretty surreal for me. But now if that's not enough, now you've written a book called The Way of Bourbon.
Yes.
So what prompted you to take on that task?
Oh, well, I think I'm probably an inveterate writer. When I look back, as far back as high school, I actually won awards for poetry, believe it or not. And all through the years, I've enjoyed writing. I have another book that's been out for 15 or 20 years. I don't even remember now, that I wrote on, of all things, Chinese philosophy.
Right.
But fast forwarding a little bit, and this is an honest answer, someone asked me the other day how long it took me to write the book, and my answer was 20 years, because as soon as I started in the whiskey business in 1987, from that moment on, things were getting recorded in my head and in my journals that sooner or later had enough weight to them that I say, "Oh, I wrote another book. I just didn't realize it." And so then I put some finishing touches on it.
Yeah. So did you keep journals throughout your career?
Oh, yeah. I won't pretend that they are heavily weighted toward bourbon. I actually do two kinds of things. I keep a personal journal, and obviously there's mentions of different events in the bourbon world. But I also keep what I think of as technical bourbon notes, where I read things, old distillers' manuals and old operating manuals, of which I have a couple, and those kinds of things. So I got two parallel sets of journals to tap when I need some material. Not to mention my foggy old brain.
So then the next book will be out next year?
It's more likely that I'll be out next year, but the honest truth is, my daughter Christy is helping me with marketing of the book, and one of the things she did was set me up a Facebook page, and I immediately cooked up a notion. I think you've probably seen it. I talk about nips, sips, and snorts.
Right.
And I'm suspicious that after I get enough of those logged in, that might be the title of my next book.
So one of the things that's seems to be a theme throughout your book is a connection to spirituality in the distillation, the whiskey making process. Uh, Talk a little bit about how you make that connection.
Well, I'm obviously interested in Taoism, Chinese philosophy, but behind that, there's basically a monistic view of things that says everything is connected.
Mm-hmm.
And from time to time, that underlying process surfaces to where we can go from a hidden process to a known process or a manifestation of it. And bourbon making, when you step back and look at it, is one of those manifestations. It's a living process. And I think part of my success in the business has been because I recognize that and learn to go with the flow of that process.
Mm-hmm. You talk about the hidden way in the book.
Yeah.
So explain what you mean by that.
Well, the bottom line is actually the core. At our core, we are all connected. No man is an island, I think Hemingway said, and that connection extends even to the physical things that are going on around us. So once we see that hidden way, depending on the magnitude at which we see it, it might be called a certain amount of enlightenment or recognition. But when you recognize the hidden way that's going on all around you, especially in bourbon making, as far as I'm concerned, that's that recognition is one of the reasons I was able to be as successful as I was in a relatively brief time of 20 years and in the broader context of bourbon.
Yeah. So you talking about the 20 years, you started with Barton in what, 87? Is that right?
1987, yes.
Yeah. And how long were you with them?
Just about exactly half of my total tenure in the business.
Okay.
I jumped ship and got on with Beam at about 96.
Okay. But you knew Booker before you started working at
Oh,
Beam.
yeah.
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 You were neighbors, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I got the job at Barton, I didn't want to jump in and buy a house in Bardstown because I didn't know anything about Bardstown. So I looked for a rental house for us to live in. And at the time, whether it was factual or not, I was told that there were only 2 rental houses available in Bardstown. And I went and looked at one of them and discovered I literally couldn't stand up straight in it. I was taller than the ceilings. And so I said, maybe I ought to look at the other house.
Yeah.
The other house was literally in Booker's backyard, and Freddie, for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had, that's the origin of my, even a blind dog finds an acorn. Well, I found an acorn early on to land next door to Booker.
Yeah. So your book there's a lot of facets to your book, and I think that people can approach it on a lot of different levels and really enjoy it. And one is the spiritual level, and we've talked a little bit about that, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, I think. But you also get into some of the science involved in whiskey making, but there's also a great sense of humor in the book. And some of the sense of humor comes through stories about or with Booker. Is there one of those that's from the book that you want to share, or maybe one that you didn't have in the book but think would be a fun one to tell?
Well, the thing about living next door to Booker is there just about always was something going on. Booker was backing out of day-to-day operations about the time that I got into the business,
Hmm.
and but there were many, many afternoons I'd come home from work and Booker'd be out there in his backyard, and I'd mosey over and we'd sit and, as Booker says, have a little snort and talk about whatever was going on. There's so many of those, it's hard to identify any particular one, but uh, one is I thought was pretty funny was when the whiskey writers came. Actually, they were no, they were writers. They had been up to see Jimmy Russell at Wild Turkey, and one of the last things Jimmy told them as they left was he knew they were going to see Booker, and he told them tell Booker that he didn't know jack shit about making whiskey. And so these guys they talked with me through the day, and when they were getting ready to leave, they were literally going to Booker's house next, and they sort of sized me up and thought maybe I was okay, and so they asked me, told them the message that they were carrying for Jimmy, and asked me what I thought Booker would do, and I said, "Well, I think he'll get a big laugh out of it, and take it as good natured poking fun."
Hmm.
And they said okay and left, and they hadn't gotten out of sight until I had Booker on the phone. I told Booker what was going to happen. He asked me, should he laugh or roar? I told him I thought he ought to roar. And I don't know, did you ever meet Booker in
I did
person?
not know.
Well, Booker was probably maybe 2 inches shorter than me, and he was a man of great physical stature, if you will.
Yes.
And when he roared, it was they probably picked it up on the seismograph at the University of Chicago, but he did indeed. They conveyed the message, and he roared, and both the writers and a couple of marketing people nearly fainted. But then Booker let them know they'd been had. But that was just one of many things.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, and you also talk in the book about commodity found in cow pastures. And along with that, you talk about you mention a little bit about marketing people and a little bit about bourbon experts. So how does that commodity found in cow pastures relate to those two fields?
You're trying to get me in trouble, Kevin. I can tell. Well, I'm retired, so I can no longer be in trouble.
That's right.
But
In trouble
uh,
with who?
I have that commodity we were referring to. I have commodity filters that I run at all times, and I've discovered that some of the marketing people I've encountered over the years and some of the experts I've encountered are prone to say things that are, shall we say, detached from reality. I'm trying to be judicious and kind
Sure,
here,
sure.
and I've got somewhere between low and no tolerance for that commodity.
You in the book you tell a story where you had I think you had a taster that had come in to the distillery, and he's supposed to be an expert, and
Uh,
he tries several different samples. So tell everybody what happened with that situation.
well, he came and we had a typical visit up to a point. I showed him around, and he tried to get me to tell him the mash bill, and I wouldn't. And just a lot of back and forth. But as the day wore on, he got ready to leave. He asked me to send him a sample of all the 4-year bourbons that we had under label at the time, and I said, okay, I'll sure do that. And so I sent him. It was probably maybe as high as 10 different labels that were 4-year whiskey at the time. I sent them all to him, and he evaluated them and wrote a piece later on and said that one of the samples was the best 4-year for the price he'd ever seen, and one of the other samples he said was barely qualified as furniture strippers. So the thing he didn't know, obviously, was that I had one of the things I did was establish absolute product standards. And for the 4-year, I had a product standard that every time we replenished that 4-year tank, we checked it against the product standard, and they were, and I use this term advisedly, they were statistically indistinguishable. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that the product didn't drift, and the thing that the whiskey expert didn't know is that all of those 4-year samples came out of that tank. They were all the same bourbon. And I immediately developed a healthy skepticism about whiskey experts and their evaluations.
I don't know how long ago that was, but it really hasn't changed. It hasn't changed much at all. And you talked a little bit about Booker and a lot of the things that there's obviously a legend around Booker Noe for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people talk about his larger than life persona and some of his quotes and some of his stories, but and you touch on this some in the book that about his technical ability and his real talent as a master distiller, and I think a lot of times that gets lost in the Booker persona.
Well, the Tao Te Ching, which I said I have an interest in, at one point says, "Therefore dwell on the fruit, not the flower." I think a lot of so-called experts and a lot of marketing people are so obsessed with the flower and pumping up the image that they have as opposed to the way things truly are, that they miss entirely the real aspect. And Booker, he was an absolute master at backslapping and telling stories and being a good old Southern boy in that regard. But Booker was a very astute person. He knew what was going on in the distillery. I mean, really knew. No guessing to it. And it didn't have anything to do with marketing or being an expert in this or expert in that. Booker knew his business and knew it well, and he was also willing to learn even from young upstarts who came sliding into the business in his backyard.
He would learn from his neighbor, yeah. And you talk in the book about protecting the process.
Yes.
And that's something that is clearly very dear to you. And so explain what that means to you and how you went about protecting the process.
Well, a lot of things, even non-technical things, but bourbon making it has very well-defined steps, as you know, and they should be defined. And if you're going to market a product that you claim is just like old granddad used to make, then you dang well need to know what old granddad's process was, and you got to make sure that your process is the same. So I spent a lot of time defining. A lot of that was in the old days. stored in whoever the master distiller was, stored in his head. And it was always a task of mine to record process steps in very well-defined fashion, and then do lots of things to make sure we followed that process. I call it process tampering, when somebody late in the night has some problem with a steaming cycle in a fermenter and suddenly decides, oh, well, we just won't steam it at all. I used to scare people to death by calling them up at 7 in the morning and saying, what in the world did you do at 2 this morning? That's what I call protecting the process.
Yeah. Well, there aren't good shortcuts to it. If you've got bad grain, but everything else in your process is solid, you've started out with you've hampered yourself in being able to end up with a good product. If you've got good grain and good fermentation, but you don't make good cuts, then you're missing out. You're skipping a good step in the process. When you get through with everything, if you don't clean it, if you don't clean everything, you're setting yourself up to make a bad product the next time. Is that
absolutely? Or if not a bad product, at least a lower yield of good product. We talk about yield in the distilling business and proof gallons per bushel. And if you start running bad steam cycles on your fermenters, for example, and don't really get them good and clean and good and sterile, you'll get an acid generating bacteria take over, and you'll get fewer. You can still make good whiskey out of it, but you'll make less of it because those little wee beasties are eating their share before you get a crack at it.
One of the things that you talk about in the book, and we've talked about a little bit about before, is this signature craft series. And I love this bottle because it is autographed by you.
Son of a gun.
How about that? So how did that signature craft series come about? And how did you come up with that concept, and how did you execute it at Jim Beam?
Well, I went to Scotland at one point to help train some people. We were getting ready to introduce bourbon, more or less, in Scotland, and the sales force was just woefully ignorant of bourbon, its history and heritage and its properties. And so they sent me over to spend a little time telling people probably more than they wanted to know about how to make bourbon. And but I also, my Scottish handlers there took me out in the evenings and helped to educate me thoroughly, I might add, to the different scotches. And I discovered Scotch covered much more ground than I thought of. I was familiar with one or two real smoky, real beady old Scotches that we imported, but I really didn't know that much about Scotch. Well, I learned a lot. I also learned that you don't want to drink too much Scotch. But anyhow, as I was coming back from there, they had pointed out that the Scotch blenders sometimes would have as many as 30 different malt whiskeys blended together to get the flavor profile they wanted. I said, now, how can we do that with bourbon? And that's where I came up with the notion, okay, we can make a freestanding bourbon as long as it's more than 51% corn. And but we can do anything we want to with the small grains, as long as they're grains. So that was the original idea, is, okay, what if we made what if we made bourbon and used brown rice for the small grain instead of rye?
Mm-hmm.
And same question for triticale and wheat, oats. So I got permission from the people on high, and we actually made a fermenter each of 6 different mash bills involved, each of which involved a different small grain. And the ultimate result was that signature craft collection.
Yeah. So, where were you in your tenure at Beam when that happened? What year did you start that distillation process?
Uh, Honest answer is damned if I can remember, but I'm thinking that it was probably around 2003.
Okay.
And that's sort of a guess. Uh, the result was I had seen warehouse samples of those whiskeys when I retired, but I didn't even know they had bottled them. I was so absent from the business. It was you guys that told me about the signature craft collection. I didn't know that they had pulled it out of the warehouse and actually bottled it.
Yeah. I'm glad they did because they're really fun and I think in a lot of ways inspired the craft whiskey movement.
Well, and here's the thing: I sort of wandered off the main line of thought there, but my whole idea in doing this was if we had a broader range of organoleptic flavor and aroma associated with each of these very different bourbons, that we could blend them together and perhaps come up with some products that were akin to the scotches that are blended together to get different profiles.
Okay.
So, and as far as I know, they still haven't done that. All of them were freestanding bourbons, and they were marketed that way.
So your vision for it was not just to necessarily have each of the 6 mash bills stand on their own as a bourbon, but to take those different mash bills and blend those together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like, and I still feel that way, that if we did if they made some more of each of those and did some careful blending, that there might be some remarkable bourbons come out of that.
I I wonder if Freddie Noe is aware of that. Because in his little book series, it's all about blending, and it's blending in some cases some non-traditional uh, uh, whiskeys in to make the little book release. I would think that would be something that he would he would jump all over with.
He probably has. I have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, I know that he's used uh, a brown rice bourbon in one of the little book blends, but I'd have to go back and see what else that he may have used. I don't know that he's tried to do a blend of each of the signature craft series together, but I don't know.
Well, he'd be starting from scratch, I'm pretty sure, because we only made one fermenter of each of those, and I expect they probably all got bottled up. They got bottled in that 375 because, as Fred says, they didn't have enough. If they had bottled it in 750s, there would have been very little of it, very few bottles of it. So that's why they went to the 375s to stretch it a little bit and give more people a chance at it.
Yeah. Well, if anybody out there knows Freddie and wants to ask him that question, I'll try to reach out and see. But I think it would be interesting to find out what his thoughts are on that too, because that seems to be the the mantle he's taken up with the whole little book series, and so that'd be fun to find out. Be fun to find out.
I'm profoundly envious of Freddie because I would have really had a grand time if they had built me a little distillery over there somewhere at Chappie's and let me play.
Yeah, playing at Jim Beam is a little different than playing at a a smaller mid-sized craft distiller.
Yeah.
You're what I think in your book you said that 17,000 gallons was the smallest.
Yeah, the
fermenter.
fermenters, actually, I think the total capacity is maybe on some of them 19, I don't even remember, but
Yeah.
it's 17 to 19,000 gallons. So you can either be a hero or a real bum if you crank out a fermenter of unsellable whiskey.
Yeah. You're not popular at that point.
Absolutely.
So on part of the book, one of the things I wanted to read just a bit of it because it's there at the end. It's in the chapter called "The Great Beyond," and I'd like you to talk about that chapter specifically. But the quote at the very end of the book is, "Let me quickly add that this kind of knowledge does not come from diving too deep in the bourbon barrel. It is the culmination of study, consideration, participation, and practice, and a deep and abiding desire to always learn and feel more of the process. It is beyond body, head, and heart. It is the hidden way. It is the way of bourbon." So that's how you conclude the book. How does that tie the whole thing together, and your thoughts on the way of bourbon?
Well, some way I want to convey, I hoped to convey to people that we live in a time where we're like butterflies flitting from one thing to the next. And I would like for people in general, not just in bourbon making, to consider carefully the depths of the things that they're doing. I've heard people joke about having knowledge a mile wide and an inch deep. I would prefer, there's an old, it's intended to be a slam, but an expert is somebody who knows more and more about less and less until he knows everything about nothing. Well, in the philosophical approach, that's no thing. And so, way in your depths, there is a core, and I want more people to tap that core knowledge. And bourbon, if that's your interest, is as good a way to do it as any. But I wish more people delved more deeply into what they were doing and looked for a body, head, heart, and core understanding of what they're doing. I don't know if I came close to answering your question or not.
No, absolutely. If you were to meet a young distiller today, what would be the advice that you would give them?
Never take any advice, not even this. I don't think I would give them any advice. There's one or two people in the business that will tell you that they trained to some degree under me in the bourbon business. And so what I would say is if you're going to do this, don't just get through the day and make sure that all the pumps are running and all the valves are open or closed that they should be. I would say consider carefully what you're doing, and when you think you're as deep in the process as you possibly can be, go one step deeper. And don't ever quit learning about the core of your process.
Yeah.
I
That's
guess
that.
that was advice after all.
No, that's actually good advice for anything.
Yeah,
You know, but it certainly applies to distilling too.
there's at least one. She's retired now. Possibly the first master distiller female in
Yep.
Kentucky, Pam Howman,
Yeah.
and Pam was a relief supervisor at both plants, which meant she had to know how both of them ran. But it also, because she was a relief supervisor, she didn't have literally a full-time job. So the way they occupied their time was shipping her over to my office and saying, do something. And I had Pam looking at process numbers probably till she was sick of them. But she went through every step in the process to a degree that I doubt very many people have done. And you can see the result. She retired a well known and well appreciated master distiller. And
Yeah.
I'm proud of her, I might add.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know anyone that's ever had a negative thing to say about Pam. She's very talented and obviously good at her job, and she learned from one of the best. So she had that going for her. I think the only thing that Pam didn't do was just be a slave to social media, and
Oh, yeah.
uh, and I think that probably kept her from being as popular as she could be or could have been, and probably didn't get her the accolades of being the first female master distiller in Kentucky. But I think that she was highly respected and highly regarded for what she did on
Well,
merit.
and as I said, I am proud of her for what she did.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about master distiller and what that means. I think it means different things to different people, and some take it a little lightly, and some take it quite seriously. I think I know. Well, I'm confident I know where you fall on that spectrum. But talk about your thoughts on being a master distiller and what makes one a master distiller.
Well, I've already been talking about that. However deep you delve into the process, come back tomorrow and delve a little deeper.
Mhm.
You can never know everything there is to know about it, and the day you quit learning is the day, in my mind, you quit being a master distiller. Uh, the A lot of people have approached that from different directions, and there's nothing wrong with that. The Beam dynasty has passed it from person to person,
Mhm.
and that's okay. Uh, the thing that I have a low tolerance for is people who get named a master distiller after, and I'm not real sure they know which end the whiskey comes out of the still. So, for me, it's constantly learning, and I also might add, in the academic world, when you get an advanced degree, you do so because you have advanced the art or science of whatever your discipline is.
Mhm.
And I really think that for somebody, I didn't consider myself a master distiller until I did something that nobody else had done in the business,
Mhm.
and it advanced the state of the art. And so I feel like that should be a job requirement.
Mhm. Yeah, and you talk in the book about the things that you had done to advance the industry, advance the craft. Uh, Talk a little bit about what those things are.
Well, some of them are so mundane that I imagine I'd put your audience pretty much to sleep by talking about them, but simple things that seem obvious to me and should to almost anybody is, do you have an absolute product standard? And if you do, how are you going to maintain it so that it doesn't drift over the years?
Right.
And that there's nothing magic about that, except you got to want to do it, and then you got to do it, and you got to maintain it, and you got to do it year after year after year. So that's not rocket science. That's just, as far as I'm concerned, common sense. But there was one particular problem that when I first came in the business, and I actually developed a method of testing for it in an environment where I went to KDA technical committee meetings and heard people say things that sounded almost like witchcraft. You had to stand on one foot and hop up and down while you're washing the glassware, or it wouldn't work, and and we're back to that commodity we were talking about. But developing methods and controlling them in the distillery lab is simple as far as analytical chemistry goes, but it was amazing to me how many people had absolutely no control over their methods or even their product standards.
Yeah. And you said those things seem mundane, but they're critical to the process.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times we focus on the things that are flashy, but you don't get to the things that are flashy without building that foundation. And the
That's
things
right.
that you brought to the forefront are foundational practices. And honestly, a lot of the foundational practices that you implemented are probably things that you glean from the different readings of the old practical distiller books and things of that nature.
Well, yeah, and in one sense, making bourbon hasn't changed since the first batch was made, whenever that was. What has changed is the equipment that we have and the measurements that we can make have become much, much more sophisticated, and we can do a better job. We should do a better job. So I'm not advocating change in the bourbon making process. I'm advocating the way that we conduct it. And that's what I mean by protecting the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got
So
me preaching, Kevin.
What's that?
I said, you got me preaching.
Good. We're just getting wound up here. We're going to pass the hat and take up a collection, and you can take that collection and you can go to Amazon.com and you can search The Way of Bourbon, and Jerry's book will come up, and just order it, get it. It can be here tomorrow. And I'll tell you, this it really does touch on a lot of different levels. Depending, so wherever you're coming from, if you're a bourbon guy or gal, there's an aspect of this book that's going to hit in your sweet spots with it. And if you are a distiller, or you want to be a distiller, maybe you're a home distiller, there are things in here about the science and the process that you'll really connect with. If you just like something that's good, fun to read, and you're a bourbon fan, that's there too. There's some wonderful stories. Jerry's got a tremendous wit, and you'll enjoy. I mean, I'll laugh out loud several times when I read it. But then there's also the spiritual aspect of it, and that doesn't come across as preachy, but it does show that there is a great amount of thought and head and heart and body and beyond that goes in to really making a good bourbon and really making a good life. And so I think there's a lot here for you to enjoy. So go to Amazon.com, buy the book. You'll really enjoy it. I promise you will.
Kevin, you're very kind.
Well, absolutely mean it. I was reading this the other day, and again, I and just come across some of these stories, and I just giggle, and some of your turn of phrase, and it's very, very clever, sir. Very clever. So, uh, uh, any final thoughts from you on the book and what you hope that people will get out of it?
Well, as I said earlier, it's my fond hope that the book, no matter what direction you're reading from, a budding distiller or a bourbon aficionado, uh, whatever direction you're reading it from, I hope that you will think deeply about what you're reading and think about what it means. Too often we do stuff and it's done in a knee-jerk fashion with little or no thought. You mentioned my tremendous wit. I've been told I only had half of one, but anyhow, I want people to actually understand what it is they're drinking or understand what it is they're making. That would be my fondest hope. Hope that somebody would get that out of that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if one person does, I consider it a monumental success.
Well, consider it a success, sir. Consider it a
Well,
success.
thank you.
Jerry, I want to thank you for being on the show. It's always an honor to talk with you. I do appreciate you and your family and all that you've come to mean to me, and the relationship that we share, and the whiskey that we share together too. So.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Everything you said, right back at you. And I think we need more of that in the world today. A little less divisiveness and a little more willingness to listen to each other.
Yes, that sure wouldn't hurt. It sure wouldn't hurt. But Jerry, again, thank you very much for being on the show again, and wish you all the success in the world with the book. And we'll be promoting that quite a bit. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
So that was our show with Jerry. He's just a fantastic guy. I love the thoughtfulness that he puts into everything that he does. And please do get onto Amazon, buy the book. I know you'll enjoy it. I think it's $15, so well worth it. There are things that everybody will enjoy about it, so please support him in that. And follow him on Facebook. Jerry O. Dalton is not O. Dalton like he's Irish, but Jerry O. period Dalton. So be sure to check that out as well. He's already posting some nice little quips and stories there as well that aren't a part of the book, and I'm sure there'll be more of that to come. So thank you very much for tuning in. Please share this episode with your friends and colleagues. I want to get the story of Jerry and his book out because he deserves it. So anything you can do to help share this, do that for Jerry. I'd appreciate it. So until next time, we'll have Chris Koenig on with us. We'll be talking about the really cool things that he's doing in terms of using rice as a secondary grain in his bourbon. And we did some side-by-side tasting of a couple of single barrels. Amazing amazing whiskeys and amazingly different. So be on the lookout for that show. Well, actually, it's going to be 2 shows. It'll be a 2-parter because we got into a lot of fun stuff, and it may end up being called the Linda Ronstadt show too. But if you want to know why, you'll have to tune in. Until next time, cheers, love, and Freebird. Good night.